The Eye in the Storm. In the middle of a torrential downpour, somewhere in the northern suburbs of Oregon, lightning slashed through the sky like blades tearing through fabric. Thunder rolled in waves, like nature's war drums unleashing its fury. The wind ravaged everything in its path. Trees bowed low, shutters slammed against the walls, and even the "For Sale" sign in front of house number 1129 flapped wildly like a torn sail in a storm-tossed sea. On the roof of that two-story house stood a solitary figure. Unshaken, unmoving, a coyote, its dark gray fur blending into the rain-soaked metal roof, remained frozen amidst the chaos like a living statue. Rain lashed against its tangled coat, but it did not flinch. Ears perked, muzzle pointed forward, and its eyes, glowing yellow, like two smoldering coals, stared straight at a second-floor window. A long, solitary howl pierced through the wind and the rain battering the glass. It did not sound like the primal call of a wild animal, but rather a summons, deep, piercing, carrying a feeling too complex to name. For a brief moment, it felt as if time paused, as though even the storm itself held back, wary of something unfolding. Inside the darkened room, Michael jolted awake. That howl was unlike anything he had ever heard. It pulled him out of his dream and into a reality that felt both familiar and foreign. Michael was a photographer, but for the past 2 years, he had distanced himself from the world's noise, retreating to this old house to live a quiet life. Storms were nothing new to him, but tonight, something was different. He stepped to the window and gently pulled aside the curtain, fluttering in the wind, and then he froze. The coyote was standing on the roof, less than 2 meters away, just over 6 feet, staring directly at him through the glass. It was not a wild stare, not the gaze of a threatened or threatening animal. It was a look of waiting, a look that clenched his chest, as if something had reached into a part of his memory he never knew he carried. The two remained frozen in that moment, man and beast, separated only by a pane of glass, a veil of rain, and an unnamed mystery. Then suddenly, as if its purpose had been fulfilled, the coyote turned, walked slowly across the back of the roof, and disappeared into the darkness. Michael did not look away from the window for several minutes, as if expecting something, a sound, a movement, a reason, but there was nothing, only the fading rumble of thunder and the softening rain. He wondered, why was it there? Why was it looking at him? Among the hundreds of houses in the area, he knew wild animals could wander into neighborhoods during storms. That was not unusual, but that gaze had not been random. It felt like a signal, or an invitation, and if that were true, then what awaited him in the darkness behind that creature? Michael could not fall back asleep at night. One question kept circling in his mind. Could it be that animal was not just an ordinary coyote? Maybe it carried a message, a story left untold, waiting for someone willing to listen? A strange sign. The morning after the storm, the sky hung heavy and gray. Like a mourning shroud, Michael stepped outside, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The breeze still carried the musty scent of fallen leaves and rotting wood. He looked up at the roof, the spot where the coyote had stood the night before. A long skid mark streaked across the tiles, and at the edge of the roof, something small and dark had gotten caught. He fetched a ladder and climbed up carefully. What he found was a piece of old fabric, crumpled, soaked through, and smelling faintly of time and mud. The stitching was rough and handmade, like a handkerchief sewn by someone long ago. But what made him pause was a dried brown stain near the edge. It looked like blood. Michael brought it inside and washed it by hand. As the water in the basin turned rust-colored, a chill ran down his spine. After drying and pressing it gently, the embroidery became clearer. The name, faint but still legible, Lily. That name scratched at the edges of his mind, not because he knew anyone named Lily, but because it felt like that name had been waiting for someone to say it out loud for a long time. He began searching through the untouched corners of the house, the attic, the basement, stuck drawers, hidden doors behind old wallpaper. In a ceiling-high cupboard, behind a panel of broken drywall, he discovered something hastily shoved away. A torn photograph, yellowed with age. The photo showed a little girl, around 6 years old, with blonde hair and a polka-dotted dress. Around her neck was an embroidered handkerchief, identical to the one Michael now held. In the corner of the photo, someone had written in ink, "Lily, that's Sprain." He sat down on the floor, heart pounding. The coincidence had gone beyond random chance. The coyote, the handkerchief, the photograph, they were connected like invisible threads, slowly weaving a picture he could not yet fully see. All night, he sat in the darkroom, staring at the piece of fabric next to the photo. For the first time in 2 years, he picked up his camera again, not to photograph people, but memory, a simple object that seemed to carry the breath of something yet unnamed. And he began to believe that the coyote did not appear by chance. It was trying to tell him a story that, perhaps, only he was ready to hear. The call from the darkness. For the next 3 nights, the coyote came back. Each time, it appeared at the same hour. Close to midnight, it did not howl, it did not cry, it just stood there, either on the roof or on the front lawn, staring into Michael's window with eyes as still and deep as a bottomless lake. And each time, Michael rose, stepped to the window, and they faced each other. No words, no movement. Then it would turn its head, walk away in the same direction, and disappear into the darkness and trees behind the neighborhood. On the 4th night, the storm had passed, but the sky remained cold and gray, heavy like the face of someone bearing an unspeakable burden. Michael opened the front door. The coyote stood just a few steps away. This time, it did not leave. It remained still, waiting, no howling, no signs, just watching. Michael stepped out, gently, as if afraid of disturbing a fragile dream. The coyote stepped back, then turned, and began to move, not fast, not hurried. It did not run, it led, with flashlight and camera in hand. Michael followed. His shoes sank slightly into the damp earth, and the crunch of dry leaves underfoot sounded like the steady rhythm of a strange pilgrimage. The surroundings slowly changed, from dimly lit streets to misty fields, then to a dense forest where light barely reached. Through a fog thick as cobwebs, Michael noticed small footprints, interwoven with the coyote's tracks, leading deeper into the woods. A child's footprints, light, short, and hesitant. He paused, his hands trembling slightly, then kept walking. In the forest, sounds began to emerge. The faint clatter of metal, like old chains rattling in the wind, echoed from afar, a whispering noise, very faint, like a child's cry drifting from somewhere deep. With every step, Michael felt something walking just behind him, but whenever he turned, there was only vague darkness and the glow of his light in the mist. Then he saw it, a rusted tin box, half buried beneath an old oak tree. He knelt down, brushing away dirt and dead leaves, and opened the lid. Inside were small, delicate items, a butterfly-shaped hair clip, a faded school badge with a barely visible class name, and a piece of yellowed paper. In smeared handwriting, it read, "If you are reading this, do not be afraid. You are not alone." Michael sank to the ground, tears slipping down unnoticed. He was no longer the reclusive man seeking peace. He was the one chosen to listen, to witness, to reconnect fragments of memories severed by time. The coyote stood at a distance, beyond the reach of light, but its eyes still glowed, and Michael knew this journey had only just begun. The buried truth. The shack appeared behind a thicket of nettles as tall as a man's head. Michael spotted it by the way his flashlight reflected off rotted wood where a door once stood. The shack leaned to one side, its roof collapsed in the corner, overtaken by weeds and vines covering almost the entire wall. The coyote stopped at the threshold, refusing to enter. It looked at Michael, eyes fixed. Michael gently pushed the creaky wooden door, which groaned like something ancient waking from its slumber. Inside, the air was thick with mold and the weight of time. Every step stirred up dust that danced in the beam of his light like smoke from a restless spirit. In the center of the room, where the light hit at an angle, was a pile of leaves, deliberately gathered. He knelt down and cleared away the decayed leaves, moss, and soft soil layer by layer. Then his hand touched wood, a square plank, just large enough to cover a small pit. When Michael lifted it, his hands shook uncontrollably. Beneath the wood was a shallow grave, barely the depth of a forearm. Inside, wrapped in old cloth and damp soil, were small bones, the remains of a child. Among the remnants was an embroidered piece of fabric, the same handkerchief with the name Lily. Michael sat motionless, as if time had frozen. In his chest, a feeling rose, one beyond sorrow. It was understanding. The story had reached its end, not through words, but through proof. And then, from outside the shack, the coyote howled, short, sharp, and final. No other howl responded. Michael called the police. The entire forest seemed to awaken as sirens echoed through the trees. Forensic teams uncovered the fabric, the bones, and the accompanying items. The missing child case was reopened. The girl's name was Lily Harmon, reported missing 15 years ago during the summer. She had last been seen playing near the edge of the woods and never returned. At the time, her father, Robert Harmon, had been suspected, but there was no evidence. Testimonies were unclear, and the investigation lost momentum. The case closed like an unhealed wound. But now, with the remains discovered just over 1 mile, approximately 1.6 kilometers, from the house, everything was reconsidered. Michael gave them his address. One older officer paused at the number, 1129. That house used to belong to Robert Harmon. The officer said he sold it after the disappearance. The whole town remembers. Michael said nothing. He simply looked toward the forest, where the coyote had vanished like a shadow. It never returned after that night. News spread quickly. Local stations reported remains of missing girl found after 15 years. Case may link to biological father, former owner of the house where current witness resides. Michael became the center of attention, unwillingly, but he refused all interview requests. To him, this was not his story. It was Lily's. He was only the one who had been led. 3 days later, as rain began to fall again, Michael dreamed of golden eyes in the mirror. Not frightening, not unfamiliar, just a quiet nod from an old friend. But child's soft laughter echoed faintly from the end of the hallway, then faded into silence. A quiet departure. After Lily's story came to light, the small town felt blanketed by a haze of memory and sorrow. People began to recall the things they had once ignored, the lonely howls at night, glimpses of a coyote near the old cemetery, or those glowing yellow eyes watching from passing car windows near the forest at dusk. No one had ever imagined that a wild animal could become a witness, or even the final storyteller. For a forgotten soul, Michael did not leave house number 1129, though it carried echoes of haunting. To him, it had become a sacred place. Every morning, he stepped onto the porch and looked toward the forest. No more coyote, no more watchful gaze, but still, he listened, as if even silence could carry a message. He began to write, not in words, but in images. Michael reopened all his old cameras, built a small studio in the basement, and pieced together photographs, the embroidered cloth, the torn picture, the rusted tin box, even the faint footprints he once saw in the woods. He titled the photo collection, The Eyes in the Storm. No publisher dared to take it, but Michael did not care. He printed 10 copies by hand and sent them to those he believed needed to see it: the retired sheriff, the town library, the school Lily once attended, and one copy left at the edge of the roof where the coyote once stood. Beneath a small stone, one rainy night, weeks later, Michael was writing when he felt something move past the window. He jumped up, heart pounding, through the rain-smeared glass. He saw a coyote crossing the narrow road in front of his house. It was not running, just walking quietly, as if returning to somewhere it had always known. Michael opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The wind carried the scent of wet earth and fallen leaves. In a flash of lightning, he saw clearly the coyote, with golden eyes. It was the same one. But this time, it did not look at him. It did not stop. It simply kept walking, its form blending into the night as though it had never existed. He did not call. He did not follow, because he understood. Its mission was complete. The story had been told. The truth had been unearthed. And the memory, though painful, had found someone willing to listen. The question still lingered in his mind. How did it know where Lily was buried? Why him, and no one else? But slowly, he learned not everything needs an answer. Some connections are not woven by logic, but by faith and the heart. Not by chance. Every time the first rains of the season pour down on the roof of house number 1129, Michael sits by the window, a cup of cold coffee in hand, eyes following the drops as they fall from the porch roof onto the stone steps. Everything is quiet now, but not silent. Beneath the damp earth, among memories thought to have faded away, something still stirs, an invisible thread connecting people, nature, and the unexplainable. Michael believes that the coyote was not just a wild animal. It did not appear by accident. It was not lost, nor driven by instinct. It came for a greater reason, a call from memory, from a small soul who had never been heard. Perhaps Lily never truly left that forest. Perhaps her laughter and the light in her eyes sent out a signal that only a sensitive creature could detect. A being that needed no words, no evidence, one that lives between two worlds, instinct and emotion. In nature, there are connections modern humans have forgotten. We pass each other with headphones on, eyes glued to screens, and hearts locked shut, but there are still creatures that see what we cannot. They hear the calls that echo from within the storm, from dreams, from drifting fragments of memory that no one has claimed. That coyote, perhaps, was the embodiment of pure instinct, where compassion needs no language. It did not come to be a hero. It did not need thanks. It simply came, quietly fulfilled its purpose, and returned to the deep forest. Michael understands he was not someone special. He was simply someone who had opened his heart at the right time. His solitude, his brokenness, his life in isolation, all of it made him silent enough to hear, patient enough to see, and human enough not to turn away. The photo book, The Eyes in the Storm, did not become a bestseller. But those who read it never forgot. A librarian from the next state sent him a letter of thanks. An old man who had lost his daughter years ago mailed him a vintage camera. These responses held no commercial value, but they were signs that the story had reached exactly where it was meant to go. Michael added one final sentence to the end of the book. Sometimes, the truth is not spoken out loud, but seen in the eyes of a creature you never thought would be your ally. And then he closed everything, not to forget, but to continue living, with an open heart and eyes ready to see what others cannot, because he knows that somewhere, in the next storm, there may once again be a silent creature, waiting for someone brave enough to follow.